May 24, 2011, Beth Israel Medical Center, New York City. A woman dies in a simple hospital room on the 11th floor, 2 weeks before her 105th birthday. Her nurse holds her hand. A priest administers last rites. The woman has lived in this room and rooms like it for 20 years. She has not left the hospital since 1991. She owns a 42-room apartment 15 blocks away. She owns a 23-acre oceanfront estate in Santa Barbara with a 22,000-square-foot French villa. She owns a 52-acre property in Connecticut with a mansion she purchased in 1951. She has never spent a single night in the Connecticut house. She has not visited the California estate since approximately 1953. The New York apartment has sat empty since she checked into the hospital. All three properties have been meticulously maintained, fully staffed, impeccably preserved. The maintenance costs have exceeded $40,000 per month for decades. The woman is Huguette Clark, heiress to a copper fortune that once rivaled the Rockefellers. At her death, her estate is valued at more than $300 million. She leaves nothing to family. She leaves $30 million to her nurse. 19 distant relatives will challenge the will. Prosecutors will investigate whether she was defrauded. The story that emerges is not about wealth. It is about what happens when money becomes a cage instead of a key. Before we explore what turned an heiress into a ghost, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're interested in the hidden stories behind America's great estates and the people who built them, subscribe to the channel. This is a story about inheritance, isolation, and the strange mathematics of loss. June 9th, 1906. Paris, France. A daughter is born to Anna LaChapelle and William Andrews Clark in an apartment on Avenue Victor Hugo in the 16th arrondissement. The father is 67 years old. The mother is 28. They name the baby Huguette Marcel Clark. The child is born into wealth that defies easy comprehension. Her father arrived in Montana as a prospector with nothing but ambition and arrived at the end of his life as one of the richest men in America. William Andrews Clark was born in Saint-Louis, 1839 in Connellsville, Pennsylvania, to a family with no money. He taught school in Iowa, studied law briefly, then joined the Confederate Army during the Civil War before deserting in 1862 to pursue what he saw as his true calling. He went west. He found his way to the Montana goldfields in 1863 and discovered that the real money was not in mining, but in supplying miners. He drove mules between Salt Lake City and the boom towns, carrying eggs and basic goods. When monthly wages for miners were $4, Clark charged $3 per dozen eggs. The markup was extraordinary. The profit was better than gold. Clark banked his profits and moved into banking itself. He opened a bank in Deer Lodge, Montana, and extended credit to miners using their claims as collateral. When they defaulted, Clark foreclosed. Property by property, claim by claim. He built an empire. He traveled to New York in the 1870s and studied mining and mineralogy at what is now Columbia University. He returned to Montana knowing how to extract copper from the earth at scale. By the 1880s, he controlled vast mining operations in Butte, Montana, and Jerome, Arizona. His fortune grew into the tens of millions. He expanded into electric power companies, newspapers, railroads, banking, lumber, cattle ranching, real estate, and sugar beets. He became one of 3 copper kings of Butte, ruthless competitors who controlled nearly every aspect of life in Montana. Clark wanted more than money. He wanted respectability. He yearned to be a statesman. In 1899, he decided to purchase a seat in the United States Senate. At that time, senators were chosen by state legislatures rather than popular vote. Clark spent more than $300,000 to $33,000 bribing Montana legislators. The bribes ranged from $240 to $100,000. His agents paid mortgages, purchased ranches, settled debts, financed banks, and delivered envelopes of cash. The scheme worked. Clark won his Senate seat in December of 1899. The corruption was too blatant to ignore. Rival copper magnate Marcus Daly had spent equally large sums trying to block Clark's election, and the scale of the bribery became public knowledge. The Senate Committee on Privileges and Elections investigated. In May of 1900, As the Senate prepared to vote on whether to void his election, Clark resigned. He avoided the formal rebuke, but lost the seat. The acting governor of Montana immediately appointed Clark to fill the vacancy Clark had just created, a transparent attempt at manipulation that failed when the legitimate governor returned and appointed someone else. Clark eventually won a Senate seat legitimately in 1901 and served one term until 1907. When asked about the bribery scandal, Clark reportedly said, "I never bought a man who wasn't for sale." Mark Twain, writing in 1907, described Clark as rotten a human being as can be found anywhere under the flag. He is a shame to the American nation, and no one has helped to send him to the Senate who did not know that his proper place was the penitentiary, with a ball and chain on his legs. The assessment was harsh but not inaccurate. Clark had exploited workers, devastated the Montana environment through unchecked mining, and corrupted government at every level. His motto appeared to be that anything could be purchased if the price was high enough. This included, in a sense, his second wife. Anna LaChapelle was born in Michigan in 1878 to French-Canadian immigrant parents. Her father died when she was young. William Clark, already enormously wealthy and recently widowed, extended financial assistance to the family. He persuaded them to allow Anna to become his ward. She entered the Clark household in Butte as a teenager. Contemporary newspaper coverage made clear what this meant. She lived under Clark's financial control and supervision. The relationship developed over years. They married secretly in France in 1901 when Clark was 62 and Anna was 23. The marriage drew public scrutiny because of the age difference, because Clark was a widower with grown children, and because the arrangement looked uncomfortably like a rich man claiming ownership of a young woman he had supported financially since childhood. Anna gave birth to two daughters. Louise Amelia Andrée Clark was born in 1902. Huguette followed in 1906. From his first marriage, Clark had 5 children, 4 of whom survived to adulthood. This meant Huguette grew up with half-siblings old enough to be her grandparents. The age gaps created distance. The family was never cohesive. Clark built monuments to his wealth. In 1907, he completed a mansion on Fifth Avenue in New York, at the corner of 77th Street. The house consumed $7 million, the equivalent of more than $200 million today. The mansion rose 9 stories and contained 121 rooms, 31 bathrooms, 4 art galleries, a swimming pool, a theater, Turkish baths, and an 80-ton coal storage room in the basement. Clark bought a quarry in New Hampshire and built a railroad to transport stone for the building. The house featured a spectacular 4-sided tower topped with an open pergola that was visible from almost anywhere in Central Park. The public called it Clark's Folly. Architecture critics described it as grotesque excess, even in an age that celebrated extravagance. Montgomery Schuyler wrote that the house was an appropriate residence for the late P.T. Barnum. Huguette grew up in this mansion, surrounded by staff who outnumbered family members. Butlers, maids, governesses, cooks, and chauffeurs maintained the household. The family traveled constantly. They spent months at a time in Paris. They took extended trips to acquire art. Huguette learned French before English. She studied violin, beginning at age 8 on a Stradivarius. She took lessons in painting, music, languages, and etiquette. She attended the Spence School in Manhattan, one of the most prestigious institutions for daughters of wealthy families. Huguette had one true companion in childhood, her sister Andrée. The girls were close despite the 4-year age difference. They traveled together, played together, and shared the peculiar isolation of extreme wealth. Andrée was quiet and withdrawn. She struggled to adapt to New York after years in Paris. She joined the Girl Scouts and found connection in the troop activities that the mansion life could not provide. October of 1919, Andrée fell ill with spinal meningitis. The disease progressed rapidly. 1 week before her 17th birthday, she died. Huguette was 13 years old. The loss shattered her. Andrée had been her closest friend, her anchor, the one person who understood what it meant to live in a world where every interaction was mediated by money and staff. After Andrée's death, the family donated 135 acres of land in Briarcliff Manor, New York, for a Girl Scout camp. They named it Camp Andrée Clark, the first national Girl Scout camp in the United States. Years later, in 1928, Huguette would donate $50,000 to the city of Santa Barbara to excavate a pond and create an artificial freshwater lake. She stipulated that it be named the Andrée Clark Bird Refuge. The memorials reflected genuine grief. They did not fill the absence. William Clark died in March of 1925 at age 86 in the Fifth Avenue mansion. His estate was valued at more than $200 million, making him one of the 50 richest Americans in history. The will divided the fortune among his surviving children and widow. Huguette, at 19, inherited tens of millions. Anna decided immediately to sell the mansion. The house was too large, too expensive, too ostentatious. It had been built to impress people Anna had no interest in impressing. Within months of Clark's death, Anna sold the property to Anthony Campagna for $3 million. Campagna demolished the house in 1927. It had stood for less than 20 years. The site became a luxury apartment building that exists today. One room from the mansion, the Salon Doré, was saved and donated to the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington. Anna and Huguette moved to an apartment at 907 Fifth Avenue, a 12-story limestone building completed in 1916. They rented the entire 12th floor, approximately 5,000 square feet with 12 rooms. The annual rent was $30,000. The apartment was luxurious by any standard, but it was not a mansion. Mother and daughter settled into a quieter existence. Anna played the harp. Huguette painted. They traveled to Santa Barbara in warm months and returned to New York for winter. In 1923, William Clark had purchased an estate in Santa Barbara called Bellosguardo, meaning beautiful lookout in Italian. The property sat on 23 acres overlooking the Pacific Ocean, with 1,000 feet of ocean frontage. The original house was an Italianate mansion built by the previous owners. Anna and Huguette visited regularly through the 1920s. After William's death, the estate became their refuge. Anna loved the climate, the views, the distance from New York society. Then the 1925 Santa Barbara earthquake damaged the house. Anna made a decision. She would tear down the Italianate mansion and build something entirely her own. Construction began during the Great Depression. Anna hired architect Reginald Johnson, who had designed the Santa Barbara Biltmore. The design was French, an 18th-century U-shaped villa. The house would have 27 rooms and more than 22,000 square feet. Anna insisted that construction proceed even as the economy collapsed. She later told people she had demolished the house and built a new one. Quote 4, the statement was partly true. Anna employed dozens of workers for years. The new mansion was completed by 1937. The house featured elaborate wood paneling, detailed cornices, chandeliers, a reflecting pool, formal gardens, and a grove of orange trees. 2 rooms from another Clark property in New York were dismantled and imported to California. A reception room with painted muslin ceilings and an imposing dining room with antique chairs. Huguette had a private wing with an enormous painting studio featuring 17-foot ceilings, a loft for storing canvases, and a private kitchenette. Every detail was custom. Every finish was impeccable. December of 1927, Huguette announced her engagement to William MacDonald Gower. He was a Princeton graduate, a law student, the son of William B. Gower, one of her father's former business associates. The engagement was celebrated in society pages across the country. The New York Herald declared that no married couple ever started married life under more brilliant auspices. The wedding took place on August 18, 1928 at Bellosguardo. It was a private ceremony, elegant and intimate. Society assumed this was the beginning of a dynasty. The marriage lasted 9 months. Huguette and William separated in 1929. They divorced in Reno, Nevada on August 11, 1930. Huguette cited desertion. William claimed the marriage had never been consummated. The divorce became public spectacle. Newspapers that had celebrated the wedding now dissected its failure. Huguette was humiliated. She returned to the 12th floor apartment at 907 Fifth Avenue where her mother still lived. This time, Huguette expanded her holdings. She purchased the entire 8th floor and eventually acquired a 3rd apartment. Over time, she controlled 42 rooms spanning 15,000 square feet across 1.5 floors. It was among the largest residential spaces in Manhattan. Huguette never married again. The divorce marked the beginning of Huguette's withdrawal. By the 1930s, she had disappeared from society pages. She no longer attended parties or social functions. She stopped appearing in public. Mother and daughter lived together in a routine that varied little. They spent winters in New York and summers in Santa Barbara. They painted together. Anna played harp while Huguette played violin. They collected Japanese artifacts. Huguette developed an obsession with dolls, particularly antique French and Japanese dolls. She commissioned custom dolls and miniature furniture. She built dollhouses with meticulous detail. By her 30s, Huguette owned more than 1,100 dolls. She attended fashion shows in the 1950s, arriving alone and speaking to no one, then ordering scale replicas of the season's haute couture to be sewn for her dolls. Nothing but the best for the miniature wardrobe. Something happened in 1942 that deepened Huguette's isolation. The details remain unclear, but several sources suggest she suffered a nervous breakdown following an FBI interrogation. The United States had entered World War II. Huguette had been an avid collector of Japanese art and artifacts since the 1930s. The FBI apparently questioned whether her Japanese connections posed a security risk. The interrogation traumatized her. The sinking of the Titanic in 1912 had sent young Huguette into an emotional tailspin. She was sensitive to violence, to loss, to anything that disrupted her carefully constructed sense of safety. The FBI's intrusion violated that safety. After 1942, Huguette became even more reclusive. Anna Clark died on October 11, 1963. She was 85 years old. Anna had been ill for years, and Huguette had known the death was coming. Knowing did not diminish the devastation. Huguette had spent 57 years rarely separated from her mother. During the brief 9 months of her marriage, Anna had lived just 4 floors away in the same building. They had survived 2 world wars and the Depression together. Anna's death left Huguette entirely alone at age 57. Huguette inherited everything. The estate was worth approximately $700 million in current dollars. Bellosguardo, the New York apartments, bank accounts, art collections, musical instruments, the doll collection, and all remaining assets passed to Huguette. She became sole owner of a fortune she had no desire to spend and properties she had no intention of visiting. She gave Bellosguardo's staff 2 instructions. Keep everything in first-class condition and make no changes. The house was to remain exactly as it had been the last time Anna saw it. Huguette never returned to Santa Barbara. For the next 48 years, Bellosguardo would sit empty, preserved at a cost of $40,000 per month. Huguette's life in New York contracted further. She had always been private. After Anna's death, privacy became isolation. Huguette occupied primarily the maid's quarters at the far end of her apartments. She had a small kitchenette installed where she could heat food. She ate crackers, sardines, bananas, and ice cream. She watched television obsessively, particularly cartoons. The Flintstones and the Smurfs were favorites. She communicated with her staff, lawyers, and accountants by telephone and through closed doors. She conducted business from behind locked doors, speaking through the wood. Many of the people who managed her affairs for decades never saw her face. She communicated in French whenever possible to prevent others from understanding her conversations. The apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue were full of treasures. Impressionist paintings by Monet, Renoir, and Degas hung on the walls. 3 Stradivarius violins were kept in cases. Antique furniture filled the rooms. The doll collection occupied an entire apartment. Everything was maintained by a housekeeper who kept the dolls' dresses impeccably ironed. Huguette moved between apartments using the back stairs to avoid elevators and neighbors. For supplies, she sent staff. If she needed cash, she filled out a check, and her mother's former social secretary, Adele Merrier, cashed it at the nearest bank branch. Huguette had an account at a local market. Anything that could be delivered was delivered. Anything that could not be delegated was avoided. What Huguette feared was contamination. A cousin in California complained constantly about bronchitis and ailments, reinforcing Huguette's belief that going outside meant exposure to germs and danger. Her sister had died of meningitis. Illness could strike without warning. Staying inside meant staying safe. Huguette was wealthy enough to make this delusion permanent. She constructed a world that required no contact with the unpredictable elements of normal existence. She spoke by phone to a small circle of people: her goddaughter Wanda Steika, Her friend Suzanne Pierre, her lawyer Wallace Bock, her accountant Irving Kamsler, her personal assistant Chris Sattler. Face-to-face meetings did not occur. In 1951, Huguette purchased another property she would never use. Le Beau Château in New Canaan, Connecticut had been built in 1937 for former Senator David A. Reed. The French-style manor sat on 52 wooded acres with 14,000 square feet of living space, 9 bedrooms, 11 marble fireplaces, an artist's studio, and a ballroom. The purchase price was not documented, but Huguette paid cash. Various explanations circulated for why she bought the property. Some relatives claimed it was intended as a Cold War bomb shelter, a refuge in case of Russian attack on New York. Others suggested she planned to move there with a second husband who died before the wedding. No evidence supports the second husband's story. Huguette never married again and never spent a night in the Connecticut house. She never furnished it. She hired caretakers who lived in matching gatehouses and maintained the empty mansion for 60 years. March 26, 1991. Huguette was admitted to Doctors Hospital on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. She was 84 years old. Her face was covered with basal cell carcinoma lesions that had been left untreated for so long they had disfigured her. She was malnourished, painfully thin, and appeared to staff like _6. Doctors treated the cancer. She recovered. Her physician strongly urged her to return home. Huguette refused. She was, 7. She wanted to stay in the hospital. Doctors' Hospital was not known for treating life-threatening illness. It was fashionable, a society hospital where wealthy people went for facelifts and discreet detoxification. Michael Jackson had been a patient there. So had Marilyn Monroe, James Thurber, and Eugene O'Neill. The 14-story building offered amenities more common to hotels than medical facilities, including a hair salon and a comfortable dining room. For someone who wanted to live away from her apartments but still be cared for, it was ideal. Huguette paid $829 per day to stay. She would pay approximately $400,000 per year for the privilege of living in a hospital room. Hadassah Peri was assigned to Huguette randomly in the spring of 1991. Peri was born Gisela Tejada Oloroso in May of 1950 in the Philippines. She had emigrated to the United States in 1972, worked at hospitals in Arkansas and New York, and obtained her nursing licenses. She married an Israeli taxi driver, Daniel Peri, in 1982 and converted to Orthodox Judaism. The Paris lived in a small apartment in Brooklyn with their 3 children. Private duty nursing was temp work. Nurses hoped for long-term assignments because taking a day off meant being replaced by someone who might step into the regular role. Hadassah worked 12-hour shifts, 8 in the morning until 8 at night, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. She was paid $30 an hour, which totaled $131,040 annually. Huguette was extremely frightened of new people. She refused most medical treatments unless Hadassah was present to hold her hand and talk calmingly. When nurses could not reach Hadassah, they sometimes pretended to be on the phone with her, telling Huguette that Hadassah said it was okay to check her blood pressure, or that she should eat now. Hadassah and Huguette formed a bond immediately. Hadassah was patient. She explained everything. She educated Huguette about who was coming and what procedures were necessary. The chemistry worked. Hadassah became Huguette's day nurse for 20 years. The hospital room was simple. It contained a hospital bed, a recliner, a chest of drawers, a bedside table, a small refrigerator, a television, a radio, a closet, and a small bathroom. The 11th floor room overlooked Central Park. Huguette liked the room simple. She filled her time watching television, talking on the phone, and giving gifts. The gifts started modestly. Hadassah's children needed school supplies. Huguette paid for preschool tuition, then elementary school, then high school, then graduate school. She paid for medical bills, piano lessons, violin lessons, summer camps. When the Paris had trouble with back taxes, Huguette paid those too. She bought Hadassah a $450,000 house after the family's Brooklyn apartment flooded, then a second apartment for $150,000, then a $775,000 house for Hadassah's brother's family, though they never moved in and it sat vacant. Huguette wrote more than 300 checks to Hadassah over 20 years. 3 times she wrote personal checks for $5 million each. Hadassah would say, quote 8, Huguette would reply. Quote 9. The Paris bought luxury vehicles with cash, a 1998 Lincoln Navigator for $48,000, a 1999 Hummer for $91,000. Finally, a 2001 Bentley Le Mans, one of only 150 in the world, for $210,000. Huguette gave Hadassah a Stradivarius violin because she remembered that Hadassah's son had once played violin, even though he had not touched the instrument in years. She gave Hadassah jewelry from Cartier. She gave cash constantly. The total gifts while Huguette lived exceeded $31 million. In her will, Huguette left Hadassah another $30 million. Huguette also gave substantial gifts to Beth Israel Medical Center, where she had transferred after Doctors Hospital merged with Beth Israel. She gave a Monet painting worth $3.5 million. She gave cash donations totaling millions. Her doctor, Henry Singman, received gifts. Staff members received bonuses. Chris Sattler, her personal assistant who managed her apartments and doll collection, received substantial gifts. Wallace Bock, her attorney, and Irving Kamsler, her accountant, also received money and gifts despite professional ethics rules prohibiting such arrangements. Bock allegedly sent $1.5 million of Huguette's money to his daughter in Israel to build a fallout shelter after the September 11th attacks. The gift-giving was constant, indiscriminate, and enormous. Every night Hadassah and Huguette spoke on the phone before bed. Sometimes Huguette would call just as Hadassah arrived home, and the answering machine would pick up first. In recordings from approximately 2007, when Huguette was 101 years old, you can hear the nightly ritual, Hadassah, quote 10, Huguette, quote 11. The affection was genuine on both sides. Hadassah worked 12-hour days for years because Huguette was uncomfortable with other nurses. Quote 12, Hadassah testified later. Quote 13, Huguette never wanted Hadassah to take off. She was uncomfortable with other people. While Huguette lived in one hospital room after another, her properties sat empty. The 3 apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue were maintained by Chris Sattler. Furniture was covered, dolls were kept in pristine condition. The Degas painting was stolen sometime in the late 1980s. Huguette reported it to the FBI but later asked them to stop investigating because she did not want the publicity. The painting was gone. Bellosguardo and Santa Barbara remained frozen exactly as it had been in 1953. Staff members maintained it. The grounds, the house, the orange grove, the reflecting pool. 2 vintage automobiles, a 1933 Chrysler Royal 8 convertible and a 1933 Cadillac Vive 16 limousine, sat in the carriage house with 1949 license plates still attached. The Connecticut property was maintained by caretakers who lived in the gatehouses. The main house remained unfurnished and unoccupied. All of this preservation cost approximately $40,000 per month across all properties. Huguette paid without hesitation. The houses had to be maintained even if she would never see them again. When Huguette needed cash, she sold assets. In 2004, she quietly sold a rare 1709 Stradivarius violin called La Pucelle, meaning, quote, 14. She sold an 1882 Renoir painting titled, quote, 15. The sales raised millions. The money funded more gifts. Huguette's fortune was enormous, but her spending was equally vast. By the late 2000s, she was running low on funds despite having started with hundreds of millions. In 2006, she listed the Connecticut property for sale at $34 million. She rejected an offer of $25 million because an appraisal had come in slightly higher at $26 million. An accepted offer at $21 million fell through when the market crashed in 2008. The house would not sell until after her death, February of 2010. Bill Dedman, an investigative reporter for NBC News, was looking at real estate listings when he noticed an unusual property. A mansion in Connecticut priced at $25 million with town records showing it had been vacant since the owner purchased it decades earlier. Dedman began researching. He discovered that the owner, Huguette Clark, was 103 years old and the daughter of a copper baron. He found that she owned multiple properties, all empty. He tracked down caretakers who confirmed they had not seen the owner in decades. Dedman located Huguette in Beth Israel Medical Center. She had been living there for nearly 20 years, despite not being terminally ill. Her own relatives did not know where she was. Many had not seen her since 1957. The story NBC News published attracted national attention. A reclusive heiress with hundreds of millions of dollars was living in a hospital room while maintaining multiple empty mansions staffed by people who never saw her. The contrast was extraordinary. In August of 2010, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office opened an investigation into Huguette's affairs. Prosecutors suspected that her lawyer Wallace Bock and accountant Irving Kamsler might be taking advantage of her. The gifts to Hadassah Peri also raised concerns. Was Huguette of sound mind? Were people manipulating an isolated elderly woman to extract money? Investigators reviewed financial records. They found the $5 million checks. They found the property purchases. They found the Bentley. They found gifts totaling tens of millions to people in positions of trust. In October of 2011, NBC News reported that Huguette had signed 2 wills in 2005. 6 weeks apart. The first will left everything to family. The second will, signed later, disinherited 19 distant relatives entirely and left the bulk of her estate to charity, with substantial bequests to Hadassah Peri, Wallace Bock Irving Kamsler, and various employees. Huguette Marcel Clark died on May 24, 2011, at Beth Israel Medical Center. She was 104 years old, 2 weeks short of her 105th birthday. Hadassah Peri was at her bedside. A Catholic priest administered last rites despite Huguette having said she did not want priests. She was entombed on the morning of May 26th at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx before the cemetery gates opened to the public. She was buried in the family mausoleum alongside her father William, her mother Anna, and her sister Andrée. The legal battle began immediately. 19 distant relatives challenged the second will. These were great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren of William Andrews Clark from his first marriage. The last time any of them had seen Huguette was 1957. Many had never met her. They argued that Huguette had been mentally ill, citing her obsession with dolls, her collection of model castles, her love of the Smurfs, her reclusiveness, and her tendency to give money freely as evidence of incompetence. They accused Hadassah Peri, Wallace Bock, and Irving Kamsler of exerting undue influence, isolating Huguette from family, and manipulating her into changing her will. The accusations resulted in court proceedings that included videotaped depositions from everyone in Huguette's inner circle. The testimony revealed a woman who was eccentric but not incompetent, isolated but not helpless, generous to a fault but making her own decisions. In September of 2013, the case was settled before going to trial. The 19 relatives received a combined $34.5 million. Hadassah Peri received nothing from the will and agreed to return $5 million of the gifts she had received while Huguette lived. Wallace Bock and Irving Kamsler gave up their executor fees, trustee roles, and bequests from the will. Beth Israel Hospital received its designated $1 million, though other parties retained the right to attempt recovery of earlier gifts the hospital had accepted. Chris Sattler received $500,000 as specified. Dr. Henry Singman received $100,000 but indicated he would relinquish it. Property managers received specified amounts. The Bellosguardo estate was designated to become the Bellosguardo Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to fostering the arts. The settlement sent a message, according to the relative's attorney, be sure that those entrusted with the care of the elderly will be held accountable for their actions. No criminal charges were filed. The properties were sold or transferred according to the settlement. The 3 apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue sold for a combined $55 million. Le Beau Château in Connecticut finally sold in April of 2014 to fashion designer Reed Krakoff and his wife for $14.3 million, a drastic reduction from the $34 million asking price, but still substantial for a house that had never been occupied. In 2018, 7 years after Huguette's death, the Bellosguardo estate was transferred to the Bellosguardo Foundation. The foundation spent 5 years preparing the property. In 2023, Bellosguardo opened for public tours for the first time in 70 years. Visitors can now walk through the rooms Huguette and Anna knew, see the reflecting pool and orange grove, view the family portraits, and experience what has been preserved. The tours cost $100 and must be reserved months in advance. The doll collection was mostly auctioned in 2020 for nearly $2 million, with select dolls retained for display. What the story reveals is not extravagance, but fear. Huguette Clark inherited a fortune built through exploitation and corruption. Her father bribed his way into the Senate and left Montana environmentally devastated. Mark Twain was not wrong when he called William Andrews Clark one of the most rotten human beings in America. But Huguette did not choose her inheritance any more than she chose the isolation that defined her life. Her sister died of meningitis when Huguette was 13. Her brief marriage ended in public humiliation. Her mother, the one constant presence, died and left her alone at 57. Every loss reinforced the lesson that connection was dangerous. Safety meant distance. Control meant staying inside. The hospital became Huguette's final retreat because it offered what her mansions could not: the illusion of care without the risk of genuine relationship. Nurses came and went on schedules. Doctors visited on rounds. Everyone had defined roles. The structure was predictable. Hadassah Peri became important not because she manipulated Huguette, but because she was reliably present. 20 years is a long time to work, 12-hour days, 7 days a week. The gifts were excessive, but the devotion was real. Whether the gifts constituted undue influence or genuine gratitude depends on whether you believe Huguette was capable of making decisions. The courts ultimately concluded that she was competent, just profoundly lonely and extraordinarily generous to the few people who entered her shrinking world. The empty mansions were not neglect, they were preservation. Huguette could not visit Bellosguardo because returning would mean confronting her mother's absence in every room. She could not furnish the Connecticut house because doing so would require admitting she had built another cage rather than an escape. The apartments at 907 Fifth Avenue sat empty because Huguette had already left them psychologically decades before she checked into the hospital. The maintenance costs were not waste. They were the price of keeping options open, even when those options would never be exercised. As long as the houses were maintained, Huguette could tell herself she might return. Abandoning them would mean admitting the isolation was permanent. What makes the story tragic is not the money. $300 million is an abstraction. The tragedy is that someone with unlimited resources could not purchase the one thing she needed: the ability to feel safe in the world. All the wealth, all the properties, all the staff, all the control could not prevent loss or protect against grief. Her father had warned her that no one would really love her, that she had to be careful. The warning became a self-fulfilling prophecy. By being careful, by protecting herself, by maintaining distance, Huguette ensured that the relationships she formed were transactional. People entered her life as employees, as service providers, as recipients of her generosity. Whether anyone loved Huguette for who she was rather than what she could provide remains unclear. Even Hadassah Peri, the closest thing to family Huguette had in her final decades, received more than $60 million in total. The love was mixed with financial incentives impossible to separate. The legal battle over Huguette's estate was not about justice, it was about money. The 19 relatives who challenged the will had not visited Huguette in decades. They filed suit because they believed they deserved a share of wealth they had never contributed to and from a woman they had never known. The settlement gave them $34.5 million, more money than most people see in lifetimes, for being genetically connected to William Andrews Clark through his first marriage. Huguette owed them nothing morally. The law determined that she owed them enough to settle the dispute. The settlement ensured that Bellosguardo would survive as a cultural institution rather than being liquidated and dispersed. In that sense, the compromise worked. The relatives received millions. The foundation received the estate. Huguette's stated wish to support the arts was honored. Today, Bellosguardo stands as Huguette left it, a time capsule of 1953, preserved at enormous expense through decades of emptiness. The vintage cars in the carriage house, the orange grove, the reflecting pool, the imported European rooms all remain. Visitors walking through the house experience what Anna and Huguette created together and what Huguette could not bear to change after her mother died. The preservation was an act of love and an act of paralysis. Unable to move forward, Huguette froze everything in place. The result is a monument to wealth loss and the strange ways grief manifests when combined with unlimited resources. The broader lesson concerns what happens when money removes all external limits. Most people cannot afford to stop engaging with the world. Economic necessity forces interaction. Huguette's wealth meant she could indulge every fear and phobia without consequence. She could hire people to handle anything that required going outside. She could pay hospitals to house her, despite not needing medical care. She could maintain empty houses indefinitely. The money that should have provided freedom instead enabled her to construct an ever smaller world until she lived in a single hospital room, surrounded by people paid to care whether she ate her crackers or watched her cartoons. The freedom wealth promised became the cage it provided. Huguette Clark was born in Paris in 1906 as the daughter of one of America's richest and most corrupt industrialists. She died in New York in 2011, having spent 2 decades in a hospital room. Between those points stretched a life defined by withdrawal from the world her money could have bought. The empty mansions stand as monuments to inheritance, isolation, and the limits of what wealth can accomplish. Bellosguardo will remain open to visitors who want to understand what $40,000 per month in maintenance preserves and what no amount of money could protect. The story Huguette Clark's life tells is not ultimately about copper or real estate or inheritance disputes. It is about a woman who had everything and chose nothing, who owned palaces and lived in one room, who could have gone anywhere and went nowhere, who inherited a fortune and discovered too late that the real inheritance was the fear and isolation that came with it.